Time to elevate. You're running on empty with Matt and Tony.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Running on Empty. I'm Matt.
And I'm Tony.
And we are running on empty. And we're working on a lot of great interviews coming up. But this is one I've been really looking forward to, Tony. So let's just jump right into it today.
Yeah, we welcome Alex Lasry. And Alex, until recently, has been Senior Vice President of the Milwaukee Bucks. He's taken a leave of absence from that position so that he can run for the United States Senate. He's a young guy. He's only 33 years old. He's got a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Pennsylvania in political science. He's got an MBA from NYU. His father, Mark, became co-owner of the Bucks in 2014. Alex became Senior Vice President of Strategy and Operations, and then Senior Vice President. And as I said, he's decided to run this U.S. Senate campaign. Alex, thank you so much for being here. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And I'm turning 34 next month. So
he is turning 34. I think it's July 15th. Is that correct?
What?
July 15th, I think, right?
That's right.
All right. Before we get to the heavy duty political stuff, Alex, let's talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. As we speak today, they are down 2-0 to the Brooklyn Nets, and the series is coming to Milwaukee. Do you think the Bucks still have a shot to pull this series out?
100%. All the Nets did was hold their home court, right? Like they won the 2 games that they were supposed to win, and we've now got to come back and win the 2 games that we're supposed to win. And I think, coming to Milwaukee is one of the toughest places to play if you're an opponent. And we're going to have a full stadium. And the sixth man of the Bucks in Fiserv Forum, our fans, I think are going to give us a boost. Giannis has constantly talked about, and I think a lot of guys have talked about how much having fans in the building means, and how it really ups our level of play. Our guys are guys who feed on that kind of emotion and that energy. And so I think coming back home is going to be a big key for us. And do I think we're still in this? 100%. Nothing happened that, isn't technically supposed to, right? The Nets you're supposed to win your home games. Right. The Nets held home court. We now come back to Milwaukee and we've got to do our job, what we're supposed to do, which is hold our home court.
All right. Well, full disclosure, I am a Brooklyn Nets fan, being originally from Brooklyn, but as a Wisconsinite for the last 32 years, I love the Bucks. Right. So I'm cool with whoever wins this series. Alex, let's talk about the politics. As I said, you're 33, going on 34. You've not held elected office before, and you want to face Ron Johnson in the U.S. Senate race. Why are you running for the United States Senate?
Look, I'm running because I think what we need is a change in Washington. I think we need kind of a fresh perspective and a new way of doing things. But, most importantly, look, for the last 10 years, we've really only had one U.S. senator. A lot of a senator's job is to appropriate funds and fight for your constituents. And for the last 10 years, Tammy's been the only one in DC fighting on behalf of the people of Wisconsin, fighting to bring change and real results. And that's why I'm in this, because I think what we need to be able to do is make sure Tammy's got a partner in DC to bring real results and real change for the people of Wisconsin. And so what I think we need in that candidate is probably a little bit different. As you said, I'm not a politician. And when you look at what happened in 2020, the non-politicians won. People who had a record of accomplishment. You look at Warnock, Ossoff, and Kelly, people who had a record of accomplishment outside of elected office, and then being able to come in and say, look, I have a record of bringing people together and doing a lot of the things we're talking about. So things like a $15 minimum wage, creating thousands of good union jobs, and our efforts on racial and social justice, and bringing the DNC convention here. These are all things that are concrete accomplishments when we can say, hey, look, we're not just talking about these issues. I'm not just going to go to the Senate to fight for these issues. I'm going to go to the Senate to actually get things done and make sure that resources and federal dollars are coming back to Wisconsin so that we can raise wages and increase jobs and investment in the state.
You mentioned Tammy Baldwin, and I want to ask you what kind of a Democrat is Alex Lasry? If you think of the last three Democrats that have been in the U.S. Senate from Wisconsin, Tammy, Russ Feingold, who was more of a maverick, and Herb Kohl, who was the billionaire owner of the Bucks. Where do you identify yourself politically?
I mean, look, I'm a Wisconsin Democrat. For me, like it's very simple. If there are issues and bills and legislation in the Senate that are going to be good for Wisconsin and is going to move Wisconsin forward, I'm going to vote for it. If it is going to have a negative impact on Wisconsin or not be good for the people of Wisconsin, I'm going to vote against it. For me, it's that simple. I'm going to the Senate and I'm running to make sure that we can do things to help move Wisconsin forward and benefit the people here. And most importantly, how are we going to, raise wages in the state? How are we going to bring jobs and investment to this state? And so, I am proudly a progressive. I think we are running a proudly progressive campaign, but I'm going to the Senate to get things done and to make sure that we're able to bring some real change and real results for the people of Wisconsin. And so that's the kind of Democrat I am, and that's the kind of senator I'm going to be.
But you would agree, Alex, that there's currently quite a split in the Democratic Party. You've got the moderate wing, and then you've got the Bernie Sanders, I'll call it, wing that have been quite critical of, people like your dad, right, who's been a hedge fund manager, and that wing of the Democratic Party has been very critical of the so-called 1% and billionaires. I mean, will you be accepted by the Bernie Sanders or Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party? What have you done that would appeal to that wing of the party?
I think this is a classic false choice that I think a lot of pundits and especially people in DC like to try to create, right? And I think when you actually look at the Democratic Party, we've always been a Big Tent, and we actually agree on a lot of the issues. You think about, where we are on 95% of the issues. We all agree, right? We all agree the wealthy should be paying their fair share. We all agree that healthcare is a human right and that we need to protect the environment, and that we need to make sure that we've got a $15 minimum wage, that unions are important and are a big part of how we move, how we move Wisconsin forward and how we increase wages. We're all in agreement that we need to bring manufacturing back and that we need to be investing in America, right? Like these are all things that we agree on. And so I don't necessarily agree that there are these massive divisions in the Democratic Party, because when you look at us, we agree on a lot of the big picture issues, right? Like all the things I said, we all agree on. Where I think, I differ in a lot of the candidates running is that we're actually doing a lot of the things that we're talking about, right? We're the only campaign in the country right now, and especially in Wisconsin, that has a unionized campaign workforce.
Yeah, talk about that. I read that recently. You have a unionized campaign workforce, and a campaign by definition is really a short-term kind of employment, correct? So what went into the thinking about unionizing the campaign?
Our staff said, hey, we want to, form a union and we want to organize. And we said, great. It's that simple, right? Like when we and IBEW came in and organized, and I think we're going to be getting to the bargaining table very shortly. And, when you ask people, and, the way that I view how someone's values are and how what they're going to do, when they go to the Senate, look at how they run their organization. Look at how they run their campaign. Right? We don't just talk about unions being important. We're actually showing it, right? Like we're saying, hey, our campaign staff wanted to organize, and we said, great, go do it. And they organized, and we're now going to be bargaining. People in the arena, our workers in the arena said, hey, we want to organize. We didn't do anything to stop them, right? We gave unprecedented access to come in and organize. The second they showed us their cards, we didn't we just accepted it and went right to the bargaining table. And so when you're talking about these kind of values that the Democratic Party believes in, we're actually practicing what we preach, and we're putting that to practice. And I think that's really important in knowing, like, okay, if you're going to go to the Senate and make sure that the PRO Act gets passed, or make sure that unions are a top priority, but just look at how we run our organization and how we run our campaign.
Matt, let me throw one more question out to you. So let me play devil's advocate on that, Alex. At least one of your opponents in the Democratic primary has called on candidates to take kind of like a pledge that they won't use personal wealth to run the campaign. And they might say that, well, yeah, of course, Alex's campaign can unionize. His campaign is going to have the financial resources to pay the $15 an hour and have the health benefits. What would you say to that argument? And number two, I think you and all the candidates have been silent on that pledge on fundraising.
I mean, my first thing would be, well, don't we believe in a $15 an hour minimum wage? Or do we only believe in a $15 an hour minimum wage when it suits our political purposes, right? Like, if we believe in unions and we believe in unionization, then do it. Then practice what you preach. And what I've said constantly is, look, I'm not, I'm going to invest in my campaign to make sure that we aren't going to be outspent by the Republicans, and to make sure that we're able to win this election, right? Like, with the Republicans are going to have an unlimited amount of money here, and we need to make sure that we have the resources to win. But if you look at what we've done so far, we raised $1 million in the first quarter. Like that wasn't me putting money in, right? That was people coming in and saying, I want to be a part of this campaign. 69 of the 72 counties here in Wisconsin donated to this campaign because they know that this is a campaign that's not going to just talk about issues, but that is going to actually bring real results. This is a campaign that is practicing what they preach, right? There's a reason why the Teamsters, IBEW, and we just got the local Milwaukee IATSE have endorsed, is because we're not just talking about the PRO Act or being pro-union. We're unionizing. We're saying, hey, go do it. Our organization, Fiserv Forum, has said, come in and organize, and we will get right to the bargaining table. We're not going to put up flyers or fight anything. Like, we want our workers at the table. And this has been a big part of our campaign. And, for me, this is not about either us as a party has to believe in the fact that, you can't go to the Senate and say, hey, unions are important, but then also say, well, my campaign can't afford to unionize, because then you're basically saying, like, okay, well, then the Republican talking point is right, that unions are too expensive and that aren't pro-growth. And what we've shown through, I think, the Bucks and Fiserv Forum and with our campaign is that is a BS talking point. Unions are pro-growth. Unions are good for raising wages and are good for business and good for the economy.
Go ahead, Matt. I'll bring you in here.
When it comes to Wisconsin, let's talk about day one. So when you're in there, what's your top three agenda items, or the top three things you want to accomplish for Wisconsin?
Yeah, well, I think the bigger picture, right? So starting from there is, how are we raising wages and bringing jobs and investment to the state? And so for me, that starts with raising wages. So a $15 an hour minimum wage, but that's also passing the PRO Act. So we got to make sure that unions are able to organize and that workers have the ability to have a voice, because I think there's a big correlation between the stagnating or declining wages that we've had, over the last 50, 60 years, and our inability to collectively bargain. All right. So I think that is something that we need to make sure. When we're talking about bringing jobs and investment here, I mean, look, the things that, job creators and people who are looking to bring jobs to a state are care about is, hey, do we have a good quality of life? Well, if I say, hey, I'm going to create 500 jobs here, or I want to be, I'm going to start a business here, can I attract that talent, and will they want to come here? Well, Wisconsin's got an incredible quality of life, but what we have to add is public transportation, right? That allows us to open up the labor pool. Yeah. It allows us to expand the labor pool and allows people to, go across, the state and live somewhere else. And so, I was talking to Corey Mason in Racine when we were walking around, and he said the biggest thing that could happen for this area is a train that connected Racine with Milwaukee, Madison, Kenosha, and the rest of the state. That is so important. And it's not the sexiest issue, right? That's not going to be the big thing. But
Right.
can we make sure that our senator is fighting in Washington and actually delivering on bringing a $1 billion grant or $1 billion of that infrastructure money to come to Wisconsin to connect Racine, Kenosha with the rest of the state, to connect Hudson and Eau Claire with the rest of the state? That would be transformative for Wisconsin.
Big
When
time.
we're talking about things like now investing in education. So how do we make sure that we have the labor pool so that if someone's trying to bring those new green advanced manufacturing jobs here, creating electric car batteries or more solar panels or wind turbines like we have in Manitowoc, we have to invest in our trade schools. We have to make sure that our trade schools are able to afford the equipment and keep up with the new kinds of technology so that someone who's looking for to bring their manufacturing operations back to the United States, they're going to say, okay, well, I can just go right to Wisconsin because they have the labor pool and the people there who are ready to just start building. And that's what we do here in Wisconsin. We build things. And so I think those are two of the top things. And then I think transportation, investing in education, housing is then another big thing. Everywhere I've gone, people have talked about, hey, we need more housing so that we have more availability. So for us to bring jobs here. And so, just to kind of finish, when we look at what's happened over the last 10 years in Wisconsin, we've grown at half the national average. So I think the national average was like 7% and we grew at around 3%. That right now means our greatest export is our people, right? We are spending our tax dollars to educate people and then they're leaving. We need to make sure that people are coming here and that we are growing. The best way to do that is to increase funding in transportation, increase funding in our technical trade schools, community colleges, and our universities for research. And then the biggest thing we can do is make sure that we have 2 senators who are actually fighting to bring those infrastructure dollars. This could be a $2 trillion infrastructure plan.
Sure.
But we make sure that those dollars are coming here to Wisconsin. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we actually have 2 senators who care to do that. Ron Johnson's not trying at all to make sure that infrastructure money is coming back here. Tammy's fighting, but imagine how much more effective we would be if we had 2 senators who were fighting to make sure that infrastructure money was coming back to Wisconsin.
Yeah. Alex, if you get the nomination, of course, the Republicans are going to say that Alex Lasry, he's only been here 7 or 8 years in Wisconsin. He's a billionaire's son. He's completely out of touch with, say, rural Wisconsin, right? All those red counties that we have in the state. What is Alex Lasry's appeal to rural Wisconsin? Because you're not going to win this election, as you know, in just Milwaukee and Madison, right? Any Democrat who gets the nomination is going to get 85% of the vote in Milwaukee, Madison. So what do you have to offer rural Wisconsin?
Well, look, I got a ton, right? And it's why we've seen so much support, since day one in all parts of the state, right? Like when we announced in day one, former state senator Dave Hansen, Dana Wachs, Mary Arnold, people from around the state have endorsed and been a part of this campaign because they know that our values are what we need, and that all I care about is making sure that Wisconsin is moving forward. I didn't have a say in where I was born. My parents didn't give me that choice. But when I've chosen to live here. This is where my wife, we're having a daughter in July. This is where we're going to be raising her. This is where we've chosen to live. Mm-hmm. So when we think about, though, the issues that you guys are talking about, what Republicans always try to create is this divide, right? They want to say, northern Wisconsin and rural Wisconsin is, completely, the issues there are completely different than in urban Wisconsin. And, the only way, if you want to give and invest in urban Wisconsin, that means you have to take away from somewhere else.
Right.
This is the United States of America. We have the resources. We do not have a finite amount of resources. We are the greatest country on earth. We can afford to invest in Milwaukee and in Eau Claire, in Columbia County and in Racine, right? Like these are not, these are not separate issues. The pie, so long as we're growing, the pie gets bigger. That means more resources and more funds for everyone. We just have to have the will. So going from there, what we're actually talking about are very much the same issues, right? We have education issues in northern, western Wisconsin, just as we have issues in education in urban Wisconsin. Issues in healthcare, right? Same thing. We brought one of the first freighter health clinics to downtown Milwaukee. Milwaukee, biggest city in Wisconsin. We brought one of the first ones to downtown Milwaukee. Same problem in more rural Wisconsin, where we have people driving an hour or two just to find good healthcare. Broadband infrastructure, right? Like these are all very similar issues. So, one thing I missed when I was saying what was one of the big things, right? Broadband across the state, because
that's huge.
When we're talking about not having broadband is like not having roads or plumbing.
Correct.
That important infrastructure. And if we're trying to bring jobs from to Wisconsin, or want someone to being able to educate your kids or being able to start a business, you've got to have access to broadband. We've got to have more housing. And so I think these issues are very similar. And the way you attack it is by actually just showing up, right? A lot of politics is just showing up. It's not always, we're not going to be speaking policy from Milwaukee or Madison and saying, how can you not be with us? We're right. Like we've got to go and show up, and we've got to go talk to people. And when you look at what Tammy Baldwin did, when you look at what Tony Evers did, Barack Obama, they showed up and they said, hey, I'm not going to just be a voice for the 50 some odd percent that votes for me. I'm going to be a voice for 100% of the state. And even if we don't agree, you are still going to be able to call me. You're going to be able to call my office, and we're going to listen and we're going to talk, and I'm going to fight for you and make sure that your community is not forgotten. And I think that's the most important thing.
When you said healthcare, do you support Medicare for all?
So, let's start with, I support, as I said in the beginning, right, that healthcare is a human right. And my way, what I want to make sure is that we can get everyone covered as quickly and efficiently as possible. And so where I am is where, Gwen Moore is, where Joe Biden is I think the best and quickest way to make sure that everyone is covered is through a public option. And so, that's where, that's what I'm in for. I think, Obamacare moved us forward, which was awesome. And that was a tough fight, and it changed the conversation, right? Like it changed the frame of the debate. And now I think if we can add the public option and make sure that everyone is covered, so that if you are, working for the bucks and you say, hey, I want to go start a small business, that you don't have to worry about going bankrupt. Or if, you get laid off and you don't have a job, that you don't have to worry about if something bad happens that, you're going to go bankrupt. Healthcare should not be something that you are worried about if you, can you go do something you want to do because you might not have healthcare.
But don't you think the Democratic Party, Alex, should be for Medicare for all?
Right,
isn't it just political corruption that prevents that from happening? I mean, the power of the insurance lobby, the pharmaceutical lobby. I mean, why can't we have Medicare for all? I agree, a public option would be a positive step. But in your judgment, why can't we just have Medicare for all? Wouldn't that just simplify the whole thing?
Look, I'm not 100% sure that it would just simplify the whole thing. I think we have seen that when people were talking about it during the presidential, and Obama has spoken about this a lot. I don't think it's just corruption and everything, right? Like when, I was, just reading The Battle for the Soul of the Nation by the Atlantic author Isaac. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I think it's Duve. But Obama was talking about that. Look, one of the biggest problems when we talk about Medicare for all or universal healthcare is 85 to 90% of the country is already covered, right? Like they already have coverage, and there's a worry that, okay, maybe I don't love what I have, but I'm nervous about what would happen if the system went through a revolutionary fundamental change. Mm-hmm. And so I think there is that nervousness and skepticism. And look, we just ran a presidential race on healthcare, right? Biden versus Bernie at the end, and people said, I want the option. And so I think what I believe in, and I think where a lot of people are is, I think it's the idea of, look, Medicare for all who want it, right? Like, what is the issue? If everyone wants the public option, everyone will just go jump on the public option. And then we're at where you are. But I think the best way to get everyone covered, and the quickest way to get everyone covered, and the way to make sure that everyone has healthcare, is through the public option. And, I don't think that that's just corruption or anything like that. I think that's an easy talking point. I think a lot of the people actually want a public option, and they want the choice, and are nervous about what could happen if the entire system completely changes. So I think, that's why, again, it's progress and moving the ball forward. And if our number one goal is to make sure that everyone is covered, there's not only one way to do that, right? There's not. And so if the public option is the way to get that done, and that's where the support is, and that's where what is going to get everyone covered, we got to do that.
Go ahead, Matt.
We're going to switch topics a little bit and go on to some of the voting things that are going on in Wisconsin and other states, obviously. But the big acronym is this HR1, and so this is something that personally, Tony and I have talked, and I think that this country definitely needs some type of voter reform, and wanted to see where you stood on that, and how you think that, like first of all, like with what's going on in Wisconsin right now, I think is fairly atrocious what they're trying to do. And then with this HR1, would you support something like that? And would it fix what's happening in these states?
I mean, look, I think HR1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act are key pieces of legislation and are important. And I am supportive. And if I'm elected to the U.S. Senate, I will be a vote in favor of it. But what it's not going to do is change state elections, right? It's not going to change state gerrymandering. And that's why it is so important that we reelect Tony Evers. Because if you don't want to see the voting restrictions that are happening in Georgia, in Texas, we've got to make sure Tony Evers is our last stand, right? If we want to make sure that maps are going to be drawn fairly, Tony Evers has to get reelected. We don't know how long this battle is going to take on, the legislature drawing maps, Tony vetoing it, and then going to the court. We don't know. If Tony Evers gets reelected, we're going to have fairer maps. I don't know that they'll be necessarily fair, but they'll be fairer.
Right.
So, the federal government can't draw state legislative maps. And so what we need to make sure is, when we're talking about voting rights, reelecting Tony Evers is probably one of the most important things we can do to ensure that the restrictive measures that we're seeing in Texas and Georgia don't happen here. With HR1, it is important. It allows us to at least not have, absurdly gerrymandered congressional maps. I think that's important. I think it can then show a way maybe for states to adopt some of the provisions that are done federally. And I think that's important. But, if we're talking about voting rights, yes, HR1, John Lewis Voting Rights Act are important. Reinstating, the teeth of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. That's absurdly important. But the best thing we can do, quite frankly, is reelect Tony Evers. And that's why, as the nominee, I'm also going to be making sure that we are working as hard as possible to ensure that Tony Evers gets reelected as governor.
Okay. Alex, we got to get at least one foreign policy question in. Israel and Palestine, or Hamas, were recently in a battle. Many people were disappointed with the Biden administration's approach to that. What was your view? I mean, what should be the United States position as regards the Israel versus Palestine issue?
Well, look, I think first, this wasn't, and I think you pretty much mentioned it. This wasn't an issue between Israel and Palestine. This was an issue between Israel and Hamas. And Hamas is designated a terrorist organization by the United States. Our government can't even negotiate with Hamas. And that's where the fight was, right? Hamas is a terrorist organization. The rest of the Arab world does not like Hamas. They view Hamas as just kind of a branch of Iran, and Iran trying to take more control. And if you look at Hamas's charter, Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution. Hamas wants to get rid of the state of Israel. And, that is in their charter. They constantly say it. And if, that to me is where the underlying problem is. I am proud of, Israel then being able to, go through and elect their new government. I think we've got, for the first time in Israeli history, Arab Israelis as part of the government, or at least voting in favor. I can't remember if they officially joined the government or just voted in favor of it. But that's a huge step forward in Israel. And, again, like to me, that's important. And it's also important, though, that Israel has to make sure that they are living up to the ideals that we all set and that they set for themselves as being the only democracy in the Middle East.
So do you think that Israel was living up to those ideals in the conduct of that war? I mean, there have been human rights groups that will say that there were way too many civilian casualties in that battle.
Well, look, I mean, I think anytime you have civilian casualties, you've got too many. And I think this is, again, the problem with Hamas. Hamas puts their operations, their missiles and everything where civilians are, putting their own civilians in harm's way. I think Israel needs to be more cognizant of that fact and doing everything they can to ensure that civilians are not in harm's way.
Right.
But this is, again, this is, I am not going to ever say that Israel is perfect by any means, right? The United States is not perfect. Israel is not perfect. But Hamas is like, we I think in this entire thing have overlooked the abuses and the issues that Hamas has had for their people. And, when you look at the rest of the Arab world, they have not come to Hamas's defense. Hamas is not viewed favorably. And again, I think we also have to remember we're 60, 70, 80 years removed from the Holocaust. That is not a lot of time. And Israel, when they see someone like Hamas, whose charter says they want to just wipe Israel off the planet and they will not recognize Israel as a nation, that's scary. And they're firing rockets into Israel. And while Israel has a good defense system, it's scary. I know people living in Israel who were frightened about what was going on, and Israel has a responsibility to ensure that that they do not have civilian casualties. But Hamas also has a responsibility to ensure that they aren't deliberately putting their citizens in harm's way.
All right. One question on defense spending. Do you think that the United States government is currently spending too much on defense? And do you think there should be a meaningful cut in defense spending?
I don't. Again, I think this is where I think that argument comes in is if we cut defense spending, we can then put that towards something else. And again, I think this is a false choice that people are trying to create, right? Like, we are the United States of America. We can fund our defense and adequately fund our defense. And we can also make sure that we are funding the proper domestic programs to ensure that people are treated fairly, that there's economic justice, that there's racial justice, and that we can fund broadband across, the country and the state to make sure that our roads and bridges aren't falling apart. This to me is just that it's just a classic false choice that I think Republicans try to put us in, which is, well, if you want to fund that, then we have to cut defense and we can't cut there are not a finite amount of resources in the United States of America. If we continue to grow the economy and grow the country, we can make sure that we are adequately funding our defense and making sure that we're adequately funding our military. And we can make sure that we are adequately funding our roads and bridges and our infrastructure.
But doesn't I think the last budget they passed for the military was like $800 billion. Doesn't that seem a little bit excessive when you consider that we're technically not at war? I mean, Iraq and Afghanistan are technically over at this point. Don't you think it's time to start moving toward a peacetime budget, if you will?
I mean, look, I'm not a defense expert, right? Like, I'm not. If in the Senate, I would want to hold hearings and talk to and ask, the people who run the Defense Department and are the chair of the Joint Chief, and asking, hey, what do you need to make sure? I mean, the fact that we have to make sure, right, that we are also making sure that we don't enter a war. And so the threats around the world are just increasing. Just because we haven't been attacked yet doesn't mean we want to let down our defenses. Just because they aren't currently at war doesn't mean we don't want to be prepared. I think where we do need to think about, though, is how are we readjusting what war is, right? World War II and, kind of those big battalions and everything, that's probably not what the next big war or anything's going to look like, right? It's probably going to be cyber attacks. It's probably going to be, more, direct, the kind of, I think, it's not like the big battalions, but more like specialty forces, right? like climate change. That's something we need to make sure that, our Defense Department can actually work on to and research and do the funding. So like, I don't necessarily think that we need to just be cutting. I think what we need to start doing, because like that's I think going to be what the Defense Department and the Joint Chiefs are saying. But I think we need to start thinking differently about the type of world that we're in, and how are we making sure that we are prepared militarily for cyber attacks, that we have this, that we're prepared to confront climate change as one of our greatest national security threats. Who knows what's going to be happening in space, right? Like we need to be prepared. But what I do think that we need to stop thinking about is, if we are investing in our defense and our military, that we can't invest in stuff at home.
Sure.
Like we need to stop believing that's the push and pull.
Well, Alex, we really appreciate your time. I think it's time for our closing statement. Many of our listeners are in Northeast Wisconsin. So what is your main pitch to voters, really not just in our region, but in all regions of the state, why they should support Alex Lasry, and how can people contact your campaign if they'd like to?
Well, anyone who's interested in the campaign, just go to alexlasry.com, and we send us an email, contribute, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I read all the emails, so if anyone wants to just talk or invite us to an event or anything, we will be there. And I think, again, one of the biggest things that we're going to make sure that this campaign is doing is following the Tony Evers, Tammy Baldwin model, which is going to places that Democrats have at times neglected, and places that Republicans have, quite frankly, taken for granted. And that's why we've already been to Hudson 2 or 3 times. We've been to Manitowoc a number of times. Eau Claire, Wausau, et cetera. Like, we are going to fight for every vote. And what we're going to make sure is that when we win, we are not going to just be a voice for the 50 some odd % that vote for us. We are going to be a voice for 100% of Wisconsin, because that's what this state deserves. And we're going to make sure that Wisconsin gets the resources, the funding, and that we're not a tax giving state, and that our tax dollars aren't going to all these other states. I want those tax dollars coming back here and investing in our infrastructure, and making sure that we're a state that is going to be on the front lines of new technologies, new growth, and making sure that, this is a state that is, hopefully at the next census, growing at, 10-15%.
All right. Well, awesome. Alex, thank you so much again for being here. We really appreciate it. And, we hope as the campaign season goes on, you might come back again.
Would love that. That would be great.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex. Great to meet you. All right, Tony, man, I thought that was a fantastic interview. I'm really enjoying these interviews with the senatorial candidates, and Alex. I really enjoyed talking with Alex.
Yeah, so we've now had Alex Lasry, and we had Tom Nelson. We're going to send out invitations. I think there are 6 candidates now, 5 or 6.
Yeah,
we'll try and get as many of them as we can, if not all of them. And Alex, I thought, had some really interesting responses to all of our questions. I mean, he clearly believes that Wisconsin needs to be more of a growth and development type of state, that we need to bring more industry into the state. And, he also doesn't seem concerned. We raised the issue about the fact that he's been in Wisconsin for a short time, and 7 or 8 years, and he thinks he can make connections with the rest of the state.
Yeah. I liked I like when he was talking about the Bucks too, but no, I wish him the best, and I look forward to, as the campaign goes forward, I'd love to interview him again, and for another episode. So
yeah, I would too. This is shaping up to be a highly competitive Democratic Party primary.
Yeah.
For U.S. Senate, and primaries are great if they do end up producing the best candidate,
right?
Because people can say all they want about the incumbent Ron Johnson. I mean, he has not announced yet if he's running for re-election. I mean, I suspect he probably will, but Ron Johnson's going to be tough. I mean, whatever Democrat gets the nomination, this is not going to be an easy race.
No. And I guess I don't understand why. I mean, to a degree. I mean, I understand why to one point, but Ron Johnson just doesn't seem well liked overall. But again, I'm not a Republican, so I can't see it from that aspect.
Well, I think what has happened in Wisconsin, like most states, right now, the grassroots energy in politics, for better or worse, are the Trump people.
Yeah.
And Ron Johnson has figured out a way to tap into, because what's happening to Republican incumbents around the country is they don't fear the Democrats. They fear being challenged on the right by the Trump people.
Yeah.
And Johnson, because of the positions he's taken, which to you and me sound kind of zany, but they really tap in to that Trump base.
Yeah.
And that's a real activist base in politics right now. The Democrats have this problem, and this is a problem that I think Alex Lasry and all the other Democrats are going to have to deal with. How do you get your base fired up for your candidate? Because right. Traditionally, when Democrats win state level races, there's a fired up group at the street level.
Yeah.
Right. Because that race is going to be in 2022, which is not a presidential election year. Correct.
Right.
So it means you're going to have to work a lot harder to get that vote out.
Yeah, well, and if he does what he's saying he wants to do with regards to going to the places that Democrats haven't typically visited,
correct,
and going to the places that Republicans have just not visited because they felt comfortable there, let's go in and let's have a conversation with these folks, because he wants to represent all of Wisconsin. Obviously, I mean, a lot of folks are going to say that, but I really believe he wants to do that. Biden said it for the presidential election. I'm going to represent all Americans, and I really believe that he wants to do that, and I think he can. So let's hope that he can go through and he can visit these people and listen to their issues, even the folks that disagree with him and are not necessarily his side. Listen to him and tell him what he can do for them. So
again, he wouldn't take the pledge to not use a lot of personal wealth to win the race. That doesn't mean he is going to use it, but I think Alex is going to have the financial resources that he needs. In fact, I think out of all the campaigns, the only direct mail so far, at least in my household, that we've received has been from Alex Lasry.
Okay.
And I think the other candidates probably don't have the resources yet to do direct mail.
That's not cheap.
No, it's not cheap. Now, I suspect that we are going to be getting direct mail from all the candidates, but the fact that he already has been able to do that shows that. And, he makes a good point, right? The way our political system is right now, you do need the financial resources to get the job done. I mean, Tom Nelson, when we had him, said he wants to work on a grassroots funding strategy similar to Bernie Sanders, correct? $50 or less. Yeah. And I think that can be done.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think all the candidates are going to have to do that somehow. So anyway, let's close, Matt, by hoping, as always, that everyone stays elevated.
Yeah, let's stay elevated, everybody, and we will see you all on the next Running on Empty. Take care, everybody.
You're Running on Empty with Matt and Tony.